February 15th, 1943. The frigid air over occupied Europe cut like a knife against Flying Officer Malcolm Ravenscroft's face as he desperately scanned the night sky. His Spitfire's fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. Just minutes earlier, his squadron had engaged a formation of German Messerschmitts, scattering them across the moonlit clouds. But in the chaotic battle, Ravenscroft had become separated, lost in the vast darkness over the North Sea, with visibility rapidly deteriorating. The young pilot's pulse quickened as he reached for his radio to call for a bearing. Without guidance, he faced the grim reality that countless Allied airmen had encountered before him. Death by disorientation, with fuel exhaustion sending him spiraling into the unforgiving waters below. But tonight would be different. As Ravenscroft adjusted his oxygen mask, a crackling voice came through his headset with precise coordinates. A signal, impossibly clear and accurate despite the storm clouds gathering around him, guided him home. "Bogey at 2 o'clock, altitude 15,000, the controller calmly reported, directing him away from enemy aircraft and toward safety. "Follow heading 175, you're 23 miles from base." Ravenscroft banked sharply, following the vector. Within minutes, the faint glow of runway lights appeared through the mist like beacons of salvation. As his wheels touched down on British soil, he exhaled deeply, unaware that his life had just been saved by a remarkable scientific breakthrough. One that began with a simple glass tube, an accidental discovery, and two physicists who dared to think differently. No one in the Royal Air Force knew that this single invention, born from a laboratory mishap involving glass in Birmingham, would ultimately save over 12,000 Allied pilots and transform the course of aerial warfare forever. Henry Whittington was born to modest beginnings in a small farming community outside of Coventry, England, on August 23, 1908. His father, a glassblower by trade, spent 30 years crafting scientific instruments for the University of Birmingham's physics department. The elder Whittington's skilled hands transformed molten glass into precisely calibrated tubes, flasks, and specialized apparatus that scientists used to probe the fundamental mysteries of the universe. It was in his father's workshop, amid the shimmering glow of the furnace and the hypnotic dance of molten glass, that young Henry first fell in love with the physical sciences. "My father could coax glass into any shape the professors required," Henry would later recall in his memoirs. "I would watch for hours as he created vacuums in glass tubes, sealing in various gases for experiments. Looking back now, I realize I was witnessing the creation of tools that would one day change everything." Unlike most boys from his social class, Henry was fortunate enough to attend grammar school, where his exceptional aptitude for mathematics and physics quickly became apparent. His chemistry teacher, Dr. Maxwell Pemberton, recognized something special in the quiet, thoughtful boy who asked questions no one else considered. Young Whittington had a peculiar way of looking at problems, Dr. Pemberton later wrote in a letter of recommendation. While others sought the most direct solution, Henry would examine the question from every angle, often finding connections the rest of us had overlooked. This unique perspective would serve Henry well when he later secured a scholarship to study physics at the University of Birmingham in 1927. The university's physics department had already established a reputation for groundbreaking research in electromagnetic radiation, particularly radio waves. For Henry, walking those hallowed halls was the culmination of a childhood dream, though he could never have predicted where that path would ultimately lead. University life proved challenging for Henry. Coming from a working-class background, he felt out of place among the privileged students who dominated the campus. He worked nights at a local factory to supplement his scholarship, often arriving at morning lectures, exhausted but determined. Despite these hardships, his brilliance could not be contained. By his second year, He had caught the attention of Professor Marcus Holloway, a leading authority on electromagnetic wave propagation. Whittington possesses that rare combination of theoretical insight and practical ingenuity, Professor Holloway noted in his assessment. He approaches physics with both the mind of a mathematician and the hands of a craftsman, a legacy, no doubt, from his father's influence. Henry's relationship with Professor Holloway would evolve from mentor-student to collaborative research partners over the following years. By the time he graduated with first-class honors in 1931, Europe was beginning to feel the economic aftershocks of the Great Depression. Academic positions were scarce, but Professor Holloway managed to secure Henry a modest research position within the department, focusing on improving radio wave detection systems. It was here that Henry first crossed paths with Frederick Garrett, a brilliant but eccentric electrical engineer whose unorthodox approach to scientific problems matched Henry's own. Their friendship was cemented during late nights in the laboratory, debating theoretical physics and sharing dreams of scientific breakthroughs that would change the world. "We were young and ambitious," Frederick would later reflect in a BBC interview. "Perhaps too ambitious, looking back, but that's what science needs, people foolish enough to believe they can accomplish the impossible." Little did they know that their partnership would soon be tested against the darkening backdrop of a Europe moving inexorably toward conflict. As the shadows of fascism spread across the continent in the mid-1930s, their research would take on new urgency and purpose. "I remember the day everything changed," Henry wrote in his journal. Professor Holloway called us into his office. His expression was grave. "Gentlemen," he said, "I believe your work may soon become vital to national security." None of us fully understood then what was coming, or how our research might one day save thousands of lives. As Henry left that meeting, a sense of foreboding settled over him. He couldn't have known that within a few short years the fate of his country would rest partly on his shoulders, or that a chance discovery involving his father's glass tubes would lead to one of the most important scientific breakthroughs of the 20th century. By 1935, the political landscape of Europe had shifted dramatically. Hitler had consolidated power in Germany, reintroducing conscription and rebuilding the German military in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. In Britain, concerns about German air power were mounting. The memory of Zeppelin raids during the Great War remained vivid in the public consciousness, but experts feared that the next conflict would bring bombing on an unprecedented scale. Sir Henry Tizard, a respected chemist and scientific advisor to the Air Ministry, recognized the urgent need for an early warning system to detect approaching enemy aircraft. In response, he established the Committee for the Scientific Survey of Air Defense, a group tasked with evaluating potential technologies that might give Britain a crucial defensive edge. Among the most promising candidates was a concept known as radio direction finding, which would later become known as radar. The basic principle was straightforward. Radio waves bounced off metal objects like aircraft would reflect back to a receiver, revealing their position. While simple in theory, implementing an effective system presented enormous technical challenges. The existing technology used long radio wavelengths that required massive antenna arrays and provided only crude positional information. A breakthrough was needed, something that could use shorter wavelengths to provide greater precision. This was precisely the problem that Henry Whittington and Frederick Garrett found themselves working on by the late 1930s. Their research focused on generating and detecting high-frequency radio waves, pushing the boundaries of what was then considered possible. But progress was painfully slow. The primary obstacle was generating enough power at the shorter wavelengths needed for accurate detection. "We were hitting the same wall repeatedly," Henry noted in his laboratory journal. "The conventional vacuum tubes simply couldn't produce the power output we required. Each time we pushed them harder, they would fail spectacularly, sometimes literally exploding in the process. The urgency of their work increased dramatically after the Munich crisis of 1938, when war with Germany seemed imminent. The Air Ministry accelerated funding for radar development, and Britain began constructing a chain of radar stations along its eastern and southern coasts. These stations, known as chain home, used relatively long wavelengths of around 10 to 15 meters. While functional, they were far from ideal, limited in range, accuracy, and vulnerable to jamming. Meanwhile, in Birmingham, Henry and Frederick continued their quest for a solution that would enable shorter wavelength radar. They experimented with various designs of vacuum tubes, attempting to create one that could generate high-power microwaves. Their laboratory became a workshop of trial and error, with more failures than successes. Each morning, I would arrive to find Henry already at work, surrounded by the remnants of the previous night's failed experiments, Frederick recalled. But there was never any sense of defeat. He would look up with that half-smile of his and say, "I've been thinking about a new approach." That was Henry. Setbacks only fueled his determination. The pressure intensified in September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland, and Britain formally entered the war. What had been an urgent research project suddenly became a matter of national survival. The scientists worked around the clock, knowing that each day without a breakthrough meant more vulnerability to German air attacks. It was during this period of feverish activity that fate intervened in the form of what appeared, at first, to be yet another laboratory accident. Henry was experimenting with a modified glass vacuum tube design, incorporating elements from his father's glass-blowing techniques. The tube contained a heated cathode, surrounded by an anode, with a strong magnetic field applied to control the flow of electrons. "I had been working for nearly 20 hours straight," Henry later described. "My eyes were burning from fatigue. As I adjusted the magnetic field strength, I accidentally knocked over a small glass container on the workbench. Cleaning up the mess, I noticed something peculiar on the oscilloscope, a spike in power output, unlike anything we'd seen before." That chance observation led to a critical insight. The unique configuration of the damaged glass tube had inadvertently created resonant cavities that dramatically amplified the output power. Henry spent the next 3 days without sleep, refining the design and confirming his findings. What emerged was the prototype of what would later be called the cavity magnetron, a revolutionary device capable of generating microwave radiation at unprecedented power levels. Instead of the few watts of power previous devices could muster, Henry's accidental discovery produced over 400 watts at a wavelength of just 10 centimeters. It was exactly the breakthrough they had been seeking. As dawn broke over the university campus on that pivotal February morning in 1940, Henry and Frederick gazed at their creation with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They knew instantly that they had developed something extraordinary, a device that could transform radar technology and potentially alter the course of the war. But they had no idea just how profound its impact would be, or how many thousands of lives their glass tube invention would ultimately save. The outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939 marked the beginning of a desperate technological race. While the British military had already established the chain-home radar network along the coast, these early warning systems operated on long radio wavelengths with significant limitations. The stations were massive, fixed installations with antenna masts towering over 100 feet high, making them obvious targets for enemy attacks. More critically, they lacked the precision needed for accurate targeting and couldn't be mounted on aircraft due to their enormous size. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, was developing its own radar systems. German scientists had independently discovered radar principles and created systems that, in some respects, were technologically superior to their British counterparts. By early 1940, the German Air Force was equipped with Würzburg radar systems capable of directing nighttime bombing raids with frightening accuracy. This technological competition unfolded against the backdrop of increasingly desperate military situations. The fall of France in June 1940 left Britain standing alone against Nazi Germany. The threat of invasion loomed large, with German forces amassing across the English Channel. Britain's survival depended on maintaining air superiority to prevent a successful cross-channel assault. Winston Churchill, who had become Prime Minister in May 1940, understood the critical importance of scientific innovation in warfare. "The empires of the future," he once observed, "are the empires of the mind." He established the Ministry of Aircraft Production under Lord Beaverbrook and gave it extraordinary powers to accelerate the development and production of vital technologies. It was in this context that Henry Whittington and Frederick Garrett's cavity magnetron assumed paramount importance. When news of their breakthrough reached the Air Ministry, Sir Henry Tizard immediately recognized its revolutionary potential. He arranged for the device to be demonstrated to military officials at the Telecommunications Research Establishment, TRE, the central laboratory for British radar development. The demonstration was scheduled for May 21, 1940, recalled Dr. Harold Matthews, a senior scientist at TRE who witnessed the event. There was considerable skepticism among the assembled experts. Previous claims of microwave breakthrough had proven disappointing. But when they activated their device, the readings on our instruments were so far beyond anything we'd seen before that several people suspected equipment malfunction. A second test confirmed the results. The cavity magnetron produced over 1 kilowatt of power at a wavelength of 10 centimeters, approximately 100 times more powerful than any comparable device. The implications were staggering. With such power at such short wavelengths, radar systems could be made small enough to fit on aircraft, precise enough to locate individual vessels at sea, and powerful enough to penetrate through cloud cover and darkness. Within days, Churchill was briefed on the discovery. Understanding its significance, he immediately ordered the highest priority development. The project was classified under the most stringent security protocols, codenamed Time Base. By June 1940, as the Battle of Britain loomed, the first production models of the magnetron were being manufactured at the General Electric Company's research laboratories. The timing could not have been more critical. German bombers had begun targeting British airfields and radar stations, attempting to blind Britain's air defenses before launching a full-scale invasion. The existing chain home stations proved surprisingly resilient, their open lattice towers allowing most of the blast force from bombs to pass through rather than destroying the structures. But the vulnerability of these fixed installations was clear. What Britain urgently needed was a radar system that could be mounted on fighter aircraft, allowing pilots to locate enemy bombers even in darkness or poor visibility. This became even more crucial as the Luftwaffe shifted to night bombing raids over British cities in September 1940, beginning the devastating period known as the Blitz. The challenge was enormous. Previous attempts at airborne radar had produced systems too heavy, too bulky, and too limited in range to be truly effective. The power requirements alone had made the concept seem almost impossible. But the cavity magnetron changed everything. We went from theoretical discussions to practical implementation virtually overnight, Dr. Matthews noted. Engineers who had spent years telling us why airborne radar couldn't work were suddenly drawing up designs and solving problems with remarkable speed. However, Britain faced another challenge: manufacturing capacity. With factories already stretched to the limit producing aircraft, weapons, and essential equipment, the resources for developing and producing advanced radar systems were limited. After intense debate within his war cabinet, Churchill made a momentous decision to share the cavity magnetron technology with the United States. America was still neutral in the conflict, but President Roosevelt had pledged to make the United States the arsenal of democracy, supplying Britain with vital war materials. Churchill reasoned that American industrial might could accelerate the development of magnetron-based radar systems far beyond what Britain could achieve alone. In August 1940, Sir Henry Tizard led a small delegation to the United States, carrying with them one of the precious cavity magnetrons. The mission was conducted under extreme secrecy. The device itself was transported in a small black metal box, handcuffed to the wrist of Dr. Edward Bowen, one of Britain's leading radar experts. When the British scientists demonstrated the magnetron to their American counterparts at the National Defense Research Committee, the reaction was one of astonishment. Dr. Alfred Loomis, a wealthy physicist who headed American radar research, immediately grasped its significance. Within weeks, he had established the Radiation Laboratory at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, dedicated to developing microwave radar based on the cavity magnetron. The Rad Lab, as it became known, would grow to employ nearly 4,000 scientists and engineers, making it one of the largest research projects of the war. Its founding marked the beginning of an unprecedented scientific collaboration between Britain and America that would ultimately extend to the Manhattan Project and beyond. Back in Britain, Henry and Frederick found themselves at the center of the war effort, working directly with military personnel to implement their invention. The transition from theoretical physics to practical warfare was jarring. "We were academics, not military men," Henry wrote. "Suddenly we were attending briefings where they discussed how many enemy aircraft our device might help destroy. It was sobering to realize that our research, which began as pure scientific inquiry, was now a weapon of war." Tom Chui. Yet both men understood the existential threat facing Britain and the moral clarity of the cause. Their invention would not only help defend their homeland, but would ultimately save countless Allied lives. As winter approached, and German bombs fell nightly on British cities, the race to deploy the new radar technology intensified. The war's outcome would depend on whether this scientific breakthrough could be transformed into operational systems before it was too late. By early 1941, the situation for Britain remained precarious. The Blitz continued to rain destruction on London and other major cities. German U-boats were taking a devastating toll on Atlantic shipping, threatening to cut Britain's vital supply lines. The Royal Air Force, though victorious in the Battle of Britain, was stretched to its limits, with pilots flying multiple sorties daily and struggling to intercept night raiders. Against this grim backdrop, a small team of scientists and engineers worked feverishly to transform the cavity magnetron from laboratory breakthrough to combat-ready technology. The challenges were formidable. Early prototypes of airborne radar systems using the magnetron were promising but plagued by reliability issues. The intense vibrations of aircraft in flight would frequently knock the sensitive equipment out of calibration. The magnetron itself sometimes failed under the stress of operational conditions. Henry Whittington found himself dividing his time between Birmingham University, where theoretical work continued, and various airfields where practical testing took place. It was at RAF Defford in Worcestershire that the first truly successful airborne radar system, the AI, Airborne Interception, Mark 7, underwent flight trials in modified Bristol Beaufighter aircraft. The night of March 14, 1941, is etched in my memory, Henry recounted years later. I was in the control tower at Defford when Squadron Leader James Whitfield took off in a radar-equipped Beaufighter. The weather was abysmal, thick cloud, no visibility. Under normal conditions, intercepting an enemy bomber would have been impossible. We had arranged for a Wellington bomber to play the role of enemy aircraft for the test. What happened next would transform air warfare. Flying in complete darkness, relying solely on the radar screen in his cockpit, Whitfield successfully located the Wellington bomber, maneuvered into position behind it, and established a textbook attack position, all without ever visually sighting his target. When Whitfield landed, he was almost speechless with excitement, Henry continued. He kept saying, "I could see it. I could actually see it on the screen, clear as day." The significance wasn't lost on any of us. We had just witnessed the beginning of the end of the bomber's advantage of darkness. The success triggered an accelerated deployment schedule. Production models of the AI Mark VII began reaching Fighter Command night fighter squadrons by mid-1941. For the first time, RAF pilots could effectively hunt German bombers in darkness. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Luftwaffe losses during night raids increased sharply, and by the end of the year, the intensity of the Blitz had diminished significantly. But the application of magnetron-based radar extended far beyond night fighters. Perhaps even more crucial was its adaptation for use in anti-submarine warfare. The Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical phase, with German U-boats sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced. Finding and destroying these submarines became the highest priority. The ASV, air-to-surface vessel, Mark III radar, another magnetron-based system, was specifically designed for this purpose. Mounted on long-range patrol aircraft like the Sunderland flying boat and Wellington bomber, it could detect the conning tower of a surfaced U-boat from miles away, even in complete darkness or heavy fog. Commander Jasper Nicholson of Coastal Command described the transformation. Before the ASV Mark III, hunting U-boats was like searching for a needle in a haystack. We would fly hundreds of hours and might, if lucky, spot one submarine. After receiving the new radar, we could effectively patrol vast areas of ocean. When a U-boat surfaced to recharge its batteries at night, thinking itself safe in the darkness, we could detect it from 20 miles away and be upon it before they knew we were there. The results were devastating for the U-boat fleet. Between January and May 1943, Allied aircraft equipped with magnetron radar sank over 41 U-boats, more than had been destroyed in the previous 3 years combined. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German submarine force, wrote in his war diary, "The enemy has rendered the U-boat ineffective, not through superior tactics or fighting spirit, but through his superiority in the field of science." The cavity magnetron continued to evolve throughout the war. The original design, which produced about 1 kilowatt of power, was refined to generate over 100 kilowatts by 1943. This increase in power allowed for the development of even more sophisticated radar systems. Perhaps the most significant of these was the H-2S ground mapping radar, which allowed bomber crews to identify ground targets even when completely obscured by clouds or darkness. First deployed operationally in January 1943, H-2S transformed the strategic bombing campaign against Germany by enabling year-round 24-hour precision bombing. The Germans quickly recognized the new threat and mounted desperate efforts to develop countermeasures. Their scientists correctly theorized that the Allies must have developed a new form of radar, operating at much shorter wavelengths than previous systems. They even captured intact components from crashed Allied aircraft. But despite their technical expertise, they were never able to successfully replicate the cavity magnetron's performance. The complexity of the device, combined with the specific manufacturing techniques required, proved beyond their wartime capabilities. For Henry Whittington and Frederick Garrett, watching their invention transform the conduct of the war brought mixed emotions. They understood the lives being saved, British pilots guided safely home, merchant seamen protected from U-boats, civilians spared from bombing, but also recognized the lethal efficiency their device had brought to modern warfare. "Science knows no national boundaries," Henry wrote in a reflective moment. "In another time, we might have been collaborating with German physicists, rather than developing technologies to defeat them. The magnetron itself is neither good nor evil. It's merely a tool. The tragedy is that humanity's greatest scientific advances so often emerge from our conflicts rather than our cooperations. As Allied forces gained the upper hand in 1943, the cavity magnetron found yet another crucial application, the precision guidance systems that would ultimately help pave the way for the D-Day landings. The scientific breakthrough that began with a glassblower's son and a chance laboratory accident had become one of the decisive technologies of World War II. By late 1943, the tide of war had decisively turned against Nazi Germany. Allied forces had secured North Africa, invaded Sicily, and begun the long push up the Italian peninsula. In the Atlantic, the U-boat threat had been largely contained, with Admiral Dönitz withdrawing his submarines from the North Atlantic shipping lanes after catastrophic losses. In the air war, the combined bombing offensive against German industry was reaching unprecedented intensity. Central to these successes was the now mature technology of microwave radar, powered by increasingly sophisticated versions of the cavity magnetron. The device that Henry Whittington and Frederick Garrett had developed in their Birmingham laboratory had evolved into dozens of specialized systems, each adapted for particular military applications. For the air crews of Bomber Command and the 8th Air Force, the H-2S ground mapping radar became their most valued tool. Previously, strategic bombing had been severely hampered by weather conditions and darkness. Cloud cover over targets frequently meant bombs falling miles from their intended targets or missions being scrapped entirely. Flight Lieutenant William Barton of 617, Squadron RAF described the transformation. Before H-2S, we would often return with our bomb load still aboard because we couldn't locate the target. With H-2S, we could identify cities, industrial areas, even specific factories through complete cloud cover. The radar screen showed rivers, lakes, and urban areas with remarkable clarity. It was like having a map that updated in real time as you flew. The statistics told the story. In 1942, before H-2S deployment, less than 20% of bombs dropped by RAF Bomber Command fell within 5 miles of their intended targets. By 1944, with H-2S widely deployed, that accuracy improved to over 60%, even in adverse weather conditions. For fighter pilots, the AI Mark 8 radar and its American equivalent, the SCR-720, transformed air combat. Squadron leader Richard Hartford of 85 Squadron, a night fighter unit, recounted, "The German bombers had owned the night. They could strike with virtual impunity because we simply couldn't find them in darkness." The radar changed everything. Suddenly, we could detect them 30 miles out, track them, and position ourselves perfectly for an attack. The hunter had become the hunted. The casualty figures reflected this new reality. In 1941, before magnetron radar deployment, Bomber Command lost an average of 9.2% of aircraft dispatched on night operations. By 1944, despite German defenses being far more formidable, this figure had dropped to 3.5%, saving thousands of aircrew lives. Perhaps the most dramatic life-saving application came in the form of Rebecca Eureka, a radar transponder system that guided aircraft to precise locations. Transport aircraft dropping paratroopers or supplies could locate small drop zones with pinpoint accuracy, even in complete darkness or over featureless terrain. For downed airmen awaiting rescue, the system could guide search aircraft directly to their location. Air-sea rescue operations, which previously had slim chances of finding aircrew downed at sea, became remarkably effective. ASR Sunderland and Walrus aircraft equipped with magnetron radar could search vast areas of ocean quickly and efficiently, detecting even a small dinghy in rough seas. Wing Commander Harold Phillips, who commanded an air-sea rescue unit in the English Channel, stated, Before radar, finding a man in the water was virtually impossible unless you had precise coordinates and good visibility. It was heartbreaking to know our boys were out there somewhere, but we couldn't locate them. After we received the ASV Mark III radar, our success rate increased tenfold. Men who would certainly have perished were brought home safely. By early 1944, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France, the cavity magnetron had become the heart of a vast array of specialized radar systems designed for the operation. Coastal surveillance radars would track German naval movements. Fighter direction radar would coordinate air cover. Ground mapping radar would guide bombers to key targets. Navigation beacons would ensure transport aircraft delivered paratroopers to the correct drop zones. For the men who would execute the largest amphibious invasion in history, these systems represented the difference between life and death. The intricate planning for D-Day relied heavily on the precision and reliability that magnetron radar provided. Henry Whittington, now working at the Telecommunications Research Establishment, with the honorary rank of Wing Commander, found himself deeply involved in the final refinements of these systems. The pressure was immense, with Supreme Allied Commander General Eisenhower personally inquiring about radar readiness during planning meetings. There was a moment in April 1944, Henry later recalled, when I truly understood the weight of responsibility we carried. Air Chief Marshal Lee Mallory showed me the casualty estimates for the invasion, the numbers of men expected to die. Then he pointed to our radar installations on the planning map and said, each one of these systems that functions properly will reduce those numbers. Every improvement you make saves lives. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that, working to ensure everything was as perfect as humanly possible. On June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the technology born from Henry and Frederick's accidental discovery played its crucial role. Radar-equipped aircraft provided continuous coverage of the battlefield, detecting and helping repel the few Luftwaffe sorties that challenged the invasion. Navigation beacons guided transport aircraft precisely to their drop zones, despite cloud cover and darkness. Radar-directed naval gunfire provided critical support to troops pinned down on the beaches. In the months that followed, as Allied forces pushed across France and toward Germany itself, magnetron radar continued to evolve. The precision of bombing improved further with the introduction of H-2X, American, and K-band versions operating at even shorter wavelengths. Fighter aircraft received more compact, lighter radar sets with greater range and resolution. By early 1945, as victory in Europe approached, the cavity magnetron had been integrated into virtually every aspect of Allied air operations. The device that began as a laboratory curiosity had become one of the most critical technologies of the war, credited by many senior commanders as being as important to Allied victory as any weapon system. Winston Churchill, who had closely followed radar development throughout the war, remarked in a private meeting with scientific advisors in March 1945, "When the history of this conflict is written, it may well be said that the cavity magnetron was the single most decisive technological advantage we possessed. Without it, many more of our young men would lie in graves, and the outcome itself might have been gravely in doubt." For the thousands of Allied airmen who returned safely to their bases, guided by radar, for the merchant seamen who reached port, because U-boats had been driven from the sea, for the civilians spared from bombing because the Luftwaffe had been defeated, the cavity magnetron was indeed the unseen savior, a piece of scientific brilliance that had changed the course of history. As the war in Europe drew to a close in May 1945, the full significance of the cavity magnetron became clearer. Military historians and commanders began the process of analyzing exactly how the various technologies developed during the conflict had influenced its outcome. The cavity magnetron consistently ranked at the top of these assessments. General Carl Spaatz, commander of U, strategic air forces in Europe stated unequivocally, radar, particularly the microwave systems derived from the cavity magnetron, reduced our bomber losses by at least 60%. Without it, we simply could not have sustained the air offensive against Germany at the intensity required for victory. Admiral Sir Max Horton, who commanded Western approaches during the critical phases of the Battle of the Atlantic, was equally emphatic. The introduction of centimetric radar was the turning point in the U-boat war. Before it arrived, we were losing. After it arrived, we were winning. The statistics tell the story with brutal clarity. Those statistics were indeed compelling. In the 6 months before widespread deployment of magnetron-based ASV radar in early 1943, German U-boats sank over 3 million tons of Allied shipping while losing 42 submarines. In the 6 months after deployment, they sank less than half that tonnage while losing 133 submarines. A complete reversal of fortunes. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris of RAF Bomber Command credited the H-2S radar system with enabling year-round operations regardless of weather conditions. Before H-2S, we might lose entire months of effective operations due to cloud cover over Germany. After its introduction, there was nowhere the enemy could hide. The result was constant pressure that their industry and transportation system could not withstand. The human impact was equally significant. RAF Bomber Command suffered some of the highest casualty rates of any Allied service, losing over 55,000 aircrew killed during the war. Yet a post-war analysis by the Air Ministry estimated that without magnetron radar, these losses would have been approximately 40% higher, representing over 22,000 additional lives lost. For Henry Whittington and Frederick Garrett, the war's end brought recognition, but of a necessarily limited kind due to continued security concerns. They were both awarded the Order of the British Empire, OBE, in the King's Birthday Honors of June 1945, with citations that referred only vaguely to services to scientific research of national importance. The true nature of their contribution remained classified for years afterward. It wasn't until the 1970s that the full story of the cavity magnetron's development could be told publicly. Even then, aspects of the more advanced radar systems developed from their invention remained restricted. In the immediate post-war period, both men returned to academic life, though forever changed by their experiences. Frederick Garrett accepted a professorship at Cambridge University, where he continued research into microwave physics that would eventually lead to important medical applications. Henry Whittington, however, took a different path. The war showed me that scientific advancement without moral guidance can lead to terrible places, Henry explained in a rare interview given in 1968. I had seen how our invention, developed for defensive purposes, had also enabled more effective bombing of German cities. I couldn't simply return to pure research without addressing the ethical dimensions of science. Henry accepted a position at Oxford University, where he established one of the first academic programs focused on the ethical implications of scientific research. His lectures and writings on the social responsibility of scientists became influential in shaping post-war attitudes towards scientific advancement, particularly in the atomic age. Both men maintained a lifelong friendship, occasionally collaborating on projects, but primarily meeting to reminisce about their wartime experiences and the extraordinary chain of events their accidental discovery had set in motion. The cavity magnetron itself found peaceful applications that neither man could have foreseen during those desperate days of 1940. The same technology that had guided bombers and hunted submarines became the heart of weather radar systems, marine navigation equipment, and, perhaps most unexpectedly, the microwave oven found in millions of homes worldwide. Percy Spencer, an American engineer working with magnetrons at Raytheon Corporation, noticed in 1945 that a chocolate bar in his pocket had melted while he was testing a magnetron. This observation led to the development of the first commercial microwave ovens in the 1950s. The device that had helped win a war was now cooking dinners. In more direct continuity with its wartime role, magnetron technology became fundamental to civil aviation safety. The air traffic control systems that guide thousands of flights daily, the weather radar that helps pilots avoid dangerous storms, and the precision approach systems that enable landings in poor visibility all evolved from wartime developments. For the thousands of RAF and Allied airmen who had survived the war thanks to radar guidance, the story of the cavity magnetron held special significance. The Guinea Pig Club, a group of badly burned RAF airmen treated by pioneering plastic surgeon Archibald McIndoe, established a special award in 1962 called the Whittington Medal, a charge presented annually to scientists whose work significantly improved aviation safety. When presenting the first medal to Henry himself, Air Vice Marshal Stanley Vincent, a Battle of Britain fighter ace, remarked, "Without your work, many of us would not be standing here today. You gave us eyes to see through darkness, fog, and cloud. You guided us home when we were lost. You helped us find the enemy before they found us. For this, we and our families owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Henry, characteristically modest, responded, "The real heroes were those who flew into danger night after night. We scientists worked in safety while you risked everything. Our contribution was simply to give you tools worthy of your courage." On a cold November morning in 1983, a small gathering assembled at the RAF Museum in Hendon to witness the unveiling of a new exhibition dedicated to radar development during World War II. At its center stood a display case containing one of the original cavity magnetrons developed by Henry Whittington and Frederick Garrett in 1940. The ceremony was attended by veterans, historians, and a new generation of scientists continuing the work in advanced radar systems. Frederick Garrett, now in his 80s, was present. Henry Whittington had passed away 3 years earlier, but his widow and children represented him. Air Commodore Malcolm Ravenscroft, whose life had been saved by radar guidance over the North Sea 4 decades earlier, delivered the opening address. Now white-haired but still standing straight with military bearing, he gazed at the small device in the display case, a simple-looking metal cylinder with glass elements that had changed the course of history. "This unassuming object," he said, gesturing toward the magnetron, "represents one of humanity's greatest achievements, not just of scientific ingenuity, but of the human spirit's capacity to find light in darkness, to create safety amid danger. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound changes come not from grand plans but from accidents, curiosity, and the determination to understand what we observe." He turned to Frederick Garrett and the Whittington family. "Because of your work, thousands of us return to our families. Children and grandchildren exist today who would never have been born. Communities thrive that would have been diminished by loss. The true legacy of the cavity magnetron cannot be measured merely in victory or defeat, but in the countless lives touched by those who survived because of it." As the ceremony concluded, an RAF Tornado fighter jet performed a flyover, its modern pulse Doppler radar, a direct descendant of those wartime systems, scanning the skies below. The continuous thread of innovation stretched from that Birmingham laboratory to the present day, an enduring testament to how a moment of scientific insight can echo through generations. The cavity magnetron stands as a reminder that in our darkest hours, human ingenuity and collaboration can create light, sometimes quite literally, that illuminates paths to safety when all seems lost. And it began with a physicist's accidental discovery with glass, a moment of curiosity, and the determination to understand what no one else had seen. Would you have recognized the significance of that accidental laboratory observation? Would you have persevered through countless failures to perfect a technology when success seemed impossible? Would you have had the courage to stake lives on an untested scientific theory? Share this story so others remember what courage, curiosity, and scientific innovation really mean, and how a single insight pursued with determination can save thousands of lives and change the course of history itself.